Good evening, friends. Operational situation at the front and news by the end of the 31st of January. We will start with you, of course, with the situation at the operational front and analyze the most important points. They asked us to comment on the evening summary yesterday, but we didn't do it. Today, we will analyze all this in more detail. Kupinsko-Limansko direction. Active hostilities are continuing in our area of Tebayevka. It means that the Russian troops are not stopping, but continue to make attempts. They are attacking the main blow from the Tebayevka trap, that is, an attempt to break through to the heights. So, if we look, we have Tebayevka, the lowland is unchanged, and everything that is west or east is all our dominant heights. And actually, in order to fully control Tabayev, to control the site, because Tebayevka is 3 destroyed buildings, to control this site, it is necessary to take a number of heights. And these heights, in fact, are what Russian troops are aimed at today. The main fighting we continue within the gray zone. Somewhere it is possible to push them out, somewhere naturally Russian troops are advancing during the day. So we say that the situation is dynamic, changing, but the Russian troops have not had that success. In other words, some parity on the battlefield is achieved in some short-term period, as we see. It can be changed if the enemy naturally increases the pressure. But now there are no prerequisites for him to strengthen it specifically on this sector of the front, because he understands that the APU is already very ready, including artillery, in order to prevent further advances. In other words, everything is working for this site, in order to prevent the Russian troops from advancing further. Therefore, the situation here is dynamic, it remains within the gray zone. Makiivka-Torskaya means the Lyman direction. In this area, the combat operations of new offensive operations remain positional. Russian troops have not carried out assault operations with the support of armored vehicles. Now, it is positional warfare. At the same time, it should be noted that the fighting does not cease in the Serebryansky forest, and there is actually quite serious pressure from the Russian troops. We talked about this with you a week ago, 4 days ago, a month ago, and they are placing a very, very big bet on it, because it contributed, taking part of the forest, contributed to transferring sufficiently serious combat-ready forces to the area north-northwest, that is, just the same, to conduct offensive actions from Makiivka to Torsky. We do not record any new changes in Bologorovka. The main fighting today remains with us southeast of the village itself. The enemy today published footage of the AFU position. On the part of the AFU, shots of Russian positions were published. Everything within the red and gray zone remains. In other words, we do not fix any changes, but we have said that there were attacks to the north and east of the settlement, and most likely they will shift the blow. And today, there is just the moment of an attempt to advance, to take the territory, well, ruins, stations, what is there? Russian troops are trying to gain a foothold here. I repeat, we do not fix any new changes. In the Bakhmut direction, the main military operations are still in Bogdanovka itself, but they have a positional character. And hot. The hot spot in the Bakhmut direction remains the area between Ivanovskoye and Kleshivka, where Russian troops continue to make attempts to advance. The vector of their attacks changes regularly, but in my opinion, they will still be aimed at Ivanovska. Because footage is being published, Russian troops are most active along the road to Ivanovskoye, respectively from Bakhmut. There are attacks within the gray zone, they are more positional in nature, but here the vector will shift. But this is my vision of the current situation, because they do not understand the very big difficulties with Kleshivka. The Kleshayevsky fortified area, the dominant heights, and it is very, very difficult for them to advance this. And actually, Russian troops are located under the dominant height, but they cannot move further. For almost 2 months already, that is, they have been stopped by the APU here, and are not allowed to move a meter. Therefore, they are looking for ways to get around it all. Naturally, the bet remains on the forest plantation north of the Kleshayevsky fortified area, but I repeat, now the strike vector is not so much on it as on Ivanovskaya. Although again, the enemy can deceive in terms of their attacks and strike vectors. According to the Avdiivsky direction, in principle, activity on the northern flank in the direction of Bakhmutovka. Verdicts remain, that is, along one of the forest belts at the intersection with the railway track, and in the area of the typical one, both in the typical one and north of it in the fields. But here everything remains within positionality. South of Wiesly, the situation is being clarified, because there are a number of messages that need clarification. So look what the situation is. The background of the 23rd year. There were active military operations in this sector of the front. There are a number of supports from which it was possible to dislodge the former Russian troops. They managed to enter this territory, take the supports. And in general, the situation was dynamic for a certain period, and within the two pillars, it is now being clarified. Why? Because, first of all, you remember the attack of the Russian troops, that is, they attacked in a southwesterly direction, then turned around and followed this support exactly the same. This is the first moment. The second point is that their infantry descended along one of the routes, and then to a T-shaped intersection, that is, they were located approximately in this area. Therefore, this section is being clarified. Whether it is under control, or whether they retreated to their original positions, is cheerful. This is the point we are clarifying today. As for the south, it remains a hot spot for us. The enemy is also conducting assault operations in the Avdiivka direction. There is a lot of misinformation today. Probably, it is necessary to say correctly for the last 24 hours. There is a lot of information about the south of Avdiivka as a whole, so you need to wait for visual confirmations. So the fighters published a video, but it's been a few days, where the Russian troops, the assault group reached. They managed to enter one of the buildings. I published a full video in my Telegram, you can go and watch it. So a tank drove up and shot this house right up close. Therefore, whether there is infantry somewhere else nearby is questionable, but in any case, there are sorties along Sportivnaya Street in the northwest direction from the enemy, which we talked about on previous broadcasts. There are a number of statements that it was possible to dislodge Russian troops from the site, but again, we do not have visual confirmation from either side, because we are now more focused, as you remember, on visual confirmation. Therefore, there are a lot of words. Somewhere the enemy reports that he has advanced, but without visual confirmation. Somewhere on our side, they are talking about what was knocked out. Therefore, this is a normal moment, because you need to understand that this is a key area of Avdiivka, where if the enemy advances, but he presses, because the footage of the attack on this area of Kolossev Street from the Russian side was published. Probably even a little more, I would say, in this area, it means that they approached the advanced positions, but the result of the snow respect is unknown. Whether they were thrown back to their original positions, or the Russian troops managed to occupy something here. Well, if there are no messages, it's unlikely. But in general, the situation is being further clarified, because the dynamics are quite serious in this sector of the front. And do not forget that there are distracting blows from the enemy north of the sand pit in the landing itself. As we talked about on previous broadcasts, to all this add a blow to the west of the Tsarskaya Okhoda complex, that is, in the direction of the railway to gain a foothold, and in the direction of the Garden Association. Therefore, the situation for clarification, it remains dynamic for the most part. We are waiting for at least visual further confirmations from this section of the front. According to Mayday, it means that by the evening, there were further reports that, well, actually, let's be blunt, the enemy has not stopped here for the last week and is conducting assault operations. Naturally, a difficult area remains, a protrusion of the gray zone, a prong, as it is called at the stake itself. It's kind of difficult to conduct military operations here. Somewhere it should be noted that the WAV operators from the AFU do not allow the Russian troops to advance as much as they want. But still the activity of the Russian troops in this sector of the front is very high. In other words, they want to align the front line here conditionally at two intersections. And then, if we take into account that there is a concentration of them, as we talked about on the previous two broadcasts, south of Pervomaiskoe, then rise and align the front line along one of the forest belts. In other words, there is such a moment, so the activity remains, but without significant changes to date, because there are active hostilities. Kurakovsky direction without significant changes. Novomikhailovka. So, 2 points will be commented on here. The first is to the north, and the second is that we have pressure from the Russian troops in the direction of the fortified area, which we talked about on previous broadcasts, southwest of Novomikhailovka. That is, they are pushing, and it is extremely important for them. At the same time, there are prerequisites that not only from the east to the west, how the Russian troops are moving. They will most likely try to strike from north to south. There is not such a zone to pass through. There is also immutability, an open field, which in fact, in the absence of a green light, will not be so effective. Taking into account aerial reconnaissance by the APU and strikes in front of drones, but there are still prerequisites that it will try to strike from 2 directions in the near future. There are prerequisites for this, because according to reports from the field, what we talked about before also increases the pressure of artillery. In other words, the number of artillery strikes has significantly increased. In other words, artillery preparation is now continuing in this sector of the front. Therefore, it is expected that they will try to carry out assault actions. As for the southwestern situation of Novomikhailovka, it means there were a number of attacks by Russian troops. He remained within the gray zone. That is, according to the frames that were published from drones, geolinking, drone frames. They reached the limits of the gray zone, they managed to be dropped to their original positions. In other words, all this is in the area of the Solenenko beam, and as we see, they do not abandon their plans. Although they managed to stop the Russian troops for some period, but still they, so to speak, gain strength, accumulate, and then conduct assault operations again. So, we do not record any changes in this sector of the front. Active fighting continues along the Velikonovo-Selkovsky direction and the Orekhovsky section of the front, but without significant changes, especially between Novoprokopovka, work has been done, and there is also quite high activity in the Verbovoy area. A number of other messages have been received from the enemy, I will voice them. This is the Kherson direction, the Tauride section of the front, to the markets, including the market. So, if we proceed from the information that is on the other side, again, as for the rest of the front, now the Russian troops are betting on the average term, that is, on Zelenka. Because you probably watched. Didn't look, I'll give some quotes from Budanev's interview, his last interview. He actually says that, well, yes, Russian troops are conducting an offensive, admits that, yes, there are partial successes, and they are advancing in the fields, this is a fact, yes, but this is clearly not the success they expected, because the forces involved are large. And now there was a message from this section of the front, that they, therefore, for the most part, as planned, I have already voiced it, will go on the defensive. That is, there will naturally be single sorties, that is, classic positional combat operations, when there is activity between 2 positions, but these positions do not change. That is, there will be such activities, but the bet is on the green. And when there is a green light, try to hit with larger forces. But at the same time, they have fears that the defense forces will also strike with the onset of Zelenka with large forces, and moreover, that another bridgehead may appear. By the way, I will write this in my forecast. It will be published in the Telegram today. There are 10 points with a 6th point. I think I will comment on it tomorrow. In more detail, the forecast itself in general, some points are still being finalized. I will give you my vision for 4 months. Well, this is the situation we have today on the front.